I've been working as a librarian in Seattle for several years now. One day, as I was walking to work, I noticed an unmarked building in a quiet, secluded area of the city. It piqued my curiosity, and I began to wonder what could be going on inside. As a librarian, I've always had passion for learning and uncovering information. I have a keen eye for detail and a natural tendency to investigate. So naturally, I became obsessed with uncovering the secrets of the unmarked building. I began by doing some online research, but I couldn't find any information about the building or the company that owned it. I decided to take matters into my own hands and began walking around the perimeter of the building, trying to find any clues. I noticed that there were no windows on the building's exterior, which struck me as odd. I also saw several people coming and going from the building, but they were all dressed in suits and seemed to be in a hurry. I tried to follow them, but they always seemed to disappear into thin air. One day, I struck up a conversation with a man who worked in the coffee shop next door. He told me that he had been curious about the building and that he had heard rumors that it was some kind of government agency. He even mentioned that he had seen people in military uniforms going in and out of the building. The more I dug into the building's mystery, the more I became convinced that there was something sinister going on inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and I began to feel like I was in danger. I started to become paranoid and anxious, and I had trouble sleeping at night. I knew I had to get to the bottom of the mystery, but I didn't know where to turn for help. Everywhere I went, I would see people and think they were watching and following me. These men in suits started coming into the library every day and wouldn't leave until we closed, and then just sat in the parking lot until I left. It really freaked me out. One night, as I was walking home from work, I noticed a black car with blacked out windows following me. I tried to tell myself it was just me being paranoid again, but it stayed behind me, following my every move. I quickened my pace and started running, but the car sped up and pulled alongside me. A man in a suit rolled down the window, showed me his pistol, and told me to get into the car. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. The man in the car took me to a parking lot of an abandoned building where there was nobody around. He started interrogating me about my investigation into the unmarked building. He told me that it was classified information and that I had to stop looking into it and forget about what I had seen. He told me that if I didn't stop, I would be framed for murder and would rot in prison for the rest of my life. Then he dropped me off in front of my house and sped off. I was so scared, I was shaking. I didn't know where to turn and didn't feel safe in my own house. I wanted to run away and move, but it made me realize that I was onto something. Whatever was going on in that building was way worse than I originally thought, and something had to be done. I continued researching and investigating. I eventually discovered that the building was being used to conduct illegal genetic experiments on humans, and that the people coming and going from the building were scientists and military personnel involved in the project. I found an online community of people who agreed to take part in clinical trials for money and had ended up permanently altered as a result. Apparently, before signing, they were led to believe the tests were for allergy medicines or for sleep studies. Then they were subjected to horrific experiments that aimed to permanently alter their DNA. I knew I had to do something to stop the experiments from continuing, but I also knew that I was putting myself in danger by going public with the information. I reached out to a local journalist and gave them all the evidence that I had gathered. Shortly after that, all the information online was nowhere to be found. I couldn't believe it. I spent the whole night trying to find information about it, but there were no traces of their stories anywhere. Then one day, I was walking home from work when I found my apartment building was completely engulfed in flames. I lost everything, all of my belongings, my home, and most importantly, my sense of security. I didn't know who was responsible for the fire, or if they were coming after me next. I had to leave Seattle and start over somewhere else. I decided to move to the East Coast, where I thought I could start fresh and leave my past behind. But the fear of being followed and watched never left me. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, never knowing whom to trust. I took a job at a small library in a quiet town, hoping to blend in and disappear. Even in this small community, I felt like I was being watched. I started to feel like I was going crazy. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, and I couldn't concentrate on anything except the fear that someone was going to come after me. Eventually, I sought out a therapist, hoping to find some relief from my constant fear and anxiety. Through therapy, I was able to process the trauma I had experienced and developed coping mechanisms to help me manage my fear. But the fear never completely went away. Every time I saw a man in a suit, every time I heard a strange noise outside my apartment, and every time I received an unknown phone call, I was convinced that someone was coming after me. Years passed by, and I tried to live my normal life. I made friends, fell in love, started a family. I started to feel happy again, but the fear was always there. Eventually, I decided to speak out about what had happened to me. I wanted to shed light on the dangers of government secrecy. I joined a community of activists who fought for transparency and accountability. Through this community, I found a sense of purpose and a way to turn my trauma into something positive. I still lived in fear, but I knew I was making a difference in the world. I never forgot the lessons I learned from my experience. I learned to trust my instincts, be vigilant, and fight for what is right. While the fear never completely went away, I found a way to live with it and to use it as a source of strength rather than a source of weakness. I have been a truck driver for almost 10 years now, and it's allowed me to travel all over the country. But there's one trip that I'll never forget. I encountered something on the road that I still can't explain, and it's been weighing on my mind ever since. I was driving through Oklahoma, headed towards Amarillo, when it all happened. It was early morning, and I had been driving for a few hours. But then, something caught my eye in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a bunch of debris floating in the water by the side of the road. But as I got closer, I realized it was moving. And then I saw its tentacles. They were huge, probably around 10 feet long, and they were writhing around in the water. I had never seen anything like it, and I honestly couldn't believe it. I slowed down and pulled off to the side of the road. I got out of my truck and walked towards it. The tentacles were attached to a body that must have been 30 feet long and covered in a thick, slimy substance. It was a freakishly mutated octopus. There it was, squirming around and making its way down the road. I was in complete shock, and I stood there staring at the creature. I never believed in anything supernatural like God, Bigfoot, aliens, or anything like that. I had always been quite skeptical of anything that science couldn't explain, but we've still only explored about 5% of the ocean, so I'm far more scared of the sea than I am of the sky. But this thing was much larger than any sea creature I had ever encountered. It was terrifying, seeing how quickly such a large creature was moving. Seeing its tentacles and body flop and squirm all over the place was disturbing. I didn't know what to do, and I just stood there, staring at it. Then suddenly, it shot toward me. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and fell hard on the ground. I could feel the creature's slimy tentacles wrapping around my legs, pulling me closer. I was in a panic, and I knew I had to get away before it killed me. It was strong and dragging me along very quickly. I got closer to its giant head and black eyes, and that's a sight I'll never forget. I was alone, with nothing but this monster trying to kill me. I was desperately trying to grab at the road to get away from it, but just managed to tear up my hands. I knew I had to fight back somehow. I managed to grab a nearby rock and threw it at the creature as hard as I could. It let out an awful screech, and its tentacles loosened their grip. I scrambled away and took off toward my truck. I opened the door, hopped in, and shut the door. When I looked ahead, the creature was nowhere to be found. I was really shaken up, but I knew I had to warn somebody about this dangerous beast. I got back into my truck and drove to the nearest town. I went straight to the local police station and explained to them what had happened. They looked at me like I was crazy, but then I found out that I wasn't the only one who had seen the creature. There were other reports of a strange, giant octopus-like creature in the area. There were also lots of reports of people going missing after swimming, fishing, and boating in that same lake. The local authorities couldn't help me at all, but they did some research and told me that the creature was likely a Pacific Northwest tree octopus that somehow had made its way to Oklahoma. They said it was highly unusual for it to be so far from its natural habitat, but that it could have happened, and they thought I was exaggerating about the size and aggression of the creature. I left the police station with more questions than answers. All I knew was that I had to come face to face with something that I never wanted to see again. It had to be some sort of paranormal creature, and I knew that I couldn't be the only one who had seen this thing. I continued down the road, made my delivery, and stopped at a motel to sleep before heading home. After a few days, I managed to calm down and process what had happened. I'm still not sure what to make of the encounter. It's something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. I'm also grateful for the experience. It opened my eyes to the possibility that there are other things out there that we don't understand. It also made me much more empathetic toward people and their experiences. You don't know what people are going through every day. When I heard people complain, I would look down on them and think that they were just being negative. After going through this, I realized that everybody has unique experiences and perspectives, and they all have merit. In the following months, I kept my eyes open for any other strange creatures or phenomenon in that area. I started to read more about the paranormal and the unexplained. I eventually found out about a creature called the Oklahoma octopus. I freaked out, and it felt so validating that so many other people had seen what I had described. I have reached out to other people who have had encounters with the creature, and several who have lost family members who had gone into that lake and never come back. Many were convinced it had to be the work of the Oklahoma octopus. I often tell this story to people and am met with disbelief and criticism of my sanity. If I was just making this up, why would I pick a giant octopus? Seriously, with all the accounts of seeing Bigfoot or UFOs out there that people believe, why would I pick a giant octopus in Oklahoma? But I used to not believe other people's stories, so I try to not get frustrated. After a long year of work, I decided to take a much-needed vacation deep into the woods in Boone, North Carolina. I planned to spend my time hiking, camping, and disconnecting from technology. But little did I know how close to death I would come. I always thought Boone was gorgeous, but I'll never go back there. I had always loved nature and enjoyed exploring the outdoors. As a software designer, I spent most of my days in front of a computer, so I looked forward to this vacation to recharge and find inspiration for my next project. I had bought a week's worth of food, a tent, a lamp, a cot, and a sleeping bag. I was prepared to immerse myself in nature and have no contact with the outside world. I was really looking forward to it. It was my second day in the woods, and I had just finished a long hike. I settled into the campsite and lit myself a nice fire. As I was preparing to cook some food, I noticed something strange in the distance. There was a tall, dark figure watching me from behind a tree. I couldn't make out any details of the figure. It gave me a bad feeling. I was pretty sure it wasn't another person, but I had picked the spot specifically because I thought I would be alone there. The figure didn't move, and it really started to freak me out. I was trying to rationalize what animal it could be, but it looked like it was too tall and lanky to be a human. I couldn't think of any animal that looked like that. I cautiously approached the figure, trying to get a closer look. As I got closer, I saw something that made me feel sick to my stomach. It was a tall, humanoid creature with long, creepy, spindly arms. The scariest part about it was that it had no face. I was in shock, and I couldn't move. I just stared at him and couldn't believe what I was seeing. I tried to process what I was seeing, and it suddenly disappeared into the woods. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. I wanted to run back to my car and leave, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I tried to rationalize what I saw. My mind was just playing tricks on me. It was just some punk teenager pulling a prank on me. It was just my imagination, but I knew what I saw was real and terrifying. The sun began to set, and I got a feeling like something was watching me. My hair stood up on edge, and I looked around to see what was watching me. I knew I needed to get out of there. I lived several hours away, and I intended on staying there for a week, but I wanted to go home more than anything. I started packing up as quickly as I possibly could. Then, I heard branches cracking in the distance and footsteps coming toward me. I was absolutely horrified, and I prepared for the worst. It felt like I was in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. Suddenly, the faceless man appeared right in front of me, and he wrapped his arms around me, and I felt like I was suffocating. I tried to fight back, but it was as if I lost all motor function, and I couldn't fight back, scream, or even breathe. I collapsed to the ground, trying to breathe desperately, and I could feel myself losing consciousness. The next thing I remember, I woke up in a panic, and the faceless humanoid creature was nowhere to be found. I was all alone, scared and deeply confused. After catching my breath and getting my thoughts together, I packed up my car and made my way back home. I probably got home at 5 a.m. the next day and got some sleep. I started having nightmares about my encounter, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I knew I had to find answers and figure out what that thing was. I initially thought it was a demon that had possessed me or stolen part of my soul. I researched it a lot and became obsessed with trying to figure out what had attacked me. I eventually found some articles about something called the Slender Man. I read several similar accounts people had experienced with the Slender Man. The most common victims appeared to be children. There was a famous court case about a child that brutally stabbed a friend 14 times at a birthday party to appease the Slender Man. I reached out to several experts and authorities on the paranormal, hoping to find some answers. One man told me the Slender Man was a supernatural being who preys on humans, causing them to go insane or disappear. He warned me to stay away from the woods, to never go back to the place I was attacked, as he'd likely be waiting for me. He didn't have to tell me that though. I get nauseous every time I hear about North Carolina now. I realized that I was lucky to have survived my encounter with the Slender Man. I couldn't believe that something like this existed, and I would spend hours every night after work reading more stories about the Slender Man. Eventually, I knew I had to move on from this experience and try to live a good life. Otherwise, he wins. I knew I had to share my story with others. I needed to warn people about the dangers of the supernatural and to urge them to stay away from the woods of Boone. I couldn't shake the feeling of fear and anxiety that stayed with me long after my encounter. I had never felt so powerless and vulnerable before. But at the same time, my encounter had given me a newfound appreciation for life and a desire to make the most of every moment. If you ever go camping in the woods, don't go alone.